So the case that I decided to research was Glenn Simmons, and he spent 48 years, 1 month, and 18 days in prison and was released in 2023 for a crime that he did not commit. So, the case started in December 30th, 1974, and at about 9:30 p.m., 2 armed men entered Edmond Liquor Store in Edmond, Oklahoma. Sue Rogers was one of the store clerks there at the time, and she was reaching for the phone to call the police when one of the armed men shot her in the head. There was another clerk working there at the time. Her name is Nora Hankins, and one of the robbers ordered her to open the cash register and give them money, and she was bent down picking up some money that fell when she heard another shot go off. And when she stood up, the 2 men were gone. They left. So 18-year-old Belinda Brown entered the liquor store wanting to use a fake ID, and she was shot in the head. So that's the shot that Norma Hankins heard. Brown survived. However, Rogers was pronounced dead in the hospital, so she did not survive. Brown was interviewed 4 days after the robbery occurred, and she said that she didn't remember much of what happened. Hankins, the other clerk that worked there, said that she wouldn't be able to identify anyone or testify against anyone because her eyes were too focused on the guns and the weapons that the robbers had, so she didn't want to do it. So during the liquor store investigation, the police were also investigating another series of robberies and murders that occurred, and on February 4th, 1975, the bodies of 2 men were found near Oklahoma City. On February 5th, Leonard Patterson was arrested, and he confessed to the murders of the 2 men, and his brother Delbert also told the police that he was with Leonard when the murders occurred, but he didn't participate in the murders, but he was there. So on January 19th, 1975, so this was a couple weeks before the Patterson brothers were arrested, the Patterson brothers were at a house party of Dorothy Norris in Oklahoma City. Dorothy Norris is the aunt of Glenn Simmons, who was 22 years old at the time, and he just moved to Oklahoma City from Harvey, Louisiana for a job. The police saw this as a connection, so they began bringing anyone they could find who went to that party on January 19th. They began bringing them in, including Simmons, and putting them in lineups for Belinda Brown to view. She viewed 8 separate live lineups, and on February 8th, 1975, after the lineups, police arrested Simmons and 21-year-old Don Roberts, who had also been at the party on January 19th. Brown identified Simmons and Roberts in 2 different lineups, and at the pretrial and again at the actual trial, and she testified that Simmons and Roberts were the only 2 people she identified in the 8 separate lineups. The prosecution's evidence mostly relied heavily on Brown's eyewitness testimony, and that allowed Simmons and Roberts to eventually get arrested. However, there was a lot of testimony from Roberts and Simmons' friends and family saying that they were nowhere near Oklahoma or the liquor store at the time of the crime. So Roberts' sister testified that on December 30th, 1974, Roberts was at her house in Dallas all day and didn't leave until around 8 p.m. that night. Roberts also testified that the first time he met Simmons was at the party on January 19th, 1975. So it would be impossible for Roberts and Simmons to pull off a robbery and a murder on December 30th, 1974, when neither of them knew each other. Simmons testified that on December 30th, 1974, he was in Harvey, Louisiana, spending the day with his friends. He also said that he's never been to Oklahoma before January 5th, 1975, and that was when he came to move in with his aunt. So he's never even been to Oklahoma before 1975. Dorothy Norris, Simmons' aunt, testified that she saw Simmons in Harvey, Louisiana in the afternoon of December 30th, and again the following morning. Richard Wilson, one of Simmons' friends, said that he was with Simmons on December 30th in Harvey, Louisiana in the afternoon and in the evening, and again the next day when they went to a football game together. Robert Antoine testified he saw Simmons in the evening of December 30th in Harvey, Louisiana, and John Bradley testified that he saw Simmons in Harvey, Louisiana at around 11 p.m. on December 30th, and that he was still there in the early morning of December 31st. So there's multiple testimony and witnesses that Simmons was in Harvey, Louisiana at the time this crime occurred, and same thing for Roberts. He was nowhere near Oklahoma, and he didn't even know who Simmons was until the party. Ultimately, on June 5th, 1975, Simmons and Roberts were convicted of capital murder, and in July 1975, they were both sentenced to death. However, one of the main issues with this case is the eyewitness testimony of Belinda Brown. She was very unsure of her identification of Simmons and Roberts. She went back and forth with the description of the defendant. She was very unsure, not confident at all. She told the police multiple times that she wanted to sleep on her decision and that she would call them again in the morning when she was more sure of herself. So very unreliable, very unsure. Yeah, okay. So eyewitness testimony is usually more wrong than it is right. There's a lot of factors going into it to see if it's accurate testimony or not. Most of the time it's not very accurate, just based on the factors of the crime and what happened. So mistaken eyewitness testimony can lead to a lot of wrongful convictions, which is what happened in this case. So I think it's just better if you're not like 100% sure. Tell the police what you know, but don't identify someone if you're not sure, because chances are they're going to convict the wrong person and they're going to spend a lot of time in jail when they shouldn't. So there are many things that, like I said, factor into that identification of the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. So the first one is witnesses' opportunity to view the perpetrator. Belinda Brown did not get a lot of time to view the perpetrator, the people at the liquor store. She walked in and then she was shot in the head. So she maybe had a couple seconds to really take in their features, and even so, in those seconds she was scared, terrified, in shock because she got shot in the head. So there's a chance that her memory is a little faulty and not very accurate. The second one is witnesses' level of attention. She probably didn't pay a whole lot of attention because she was just shot in the head, so she was a little more concerned about that. Again, she didn't really have a good chance or a good opportunity to really look at the offenders and really take in like their features and memorize them, so not a lot of attention there. The next one is the accuracy of the witness's previous description of the offender. Like I said before, she went back and forth about the description. She changed it a lot. She said that, I think the final thing she said was that the offender had a beard, was about 6 feet tall and 200 pounds, and was about 200 pounds, and Simmons at the time of the crime did not fit that description at all. He was about the opposite of that description, so they did not match up at all, and yet he was still convicted. So yeah, her description kept changing. Not very sure of it either. The next one is the witness's degree of certainty. Again, wasn't confident in her decision, didn't really know that well what he looked like. There was times in 1995, the trial prosecutor wrote a letter to Simmons saying that Belinda Brown wanted to think about the identification overnight, and this is like 20 years after the crime occurred, and she was still thinking about it, so she's very not sure and not certain of her decision at all. And the last one is the amount of time between witnessing the crime and making the identification. So the crime occurred in December 30th, 1974, and the lineup was February 7th and 8th of 1975, so there's about 2 months there, give or take, between what she actually saw and when she saw people lining up. So I think that plays a big role in it, because she wasn't sure from the beginning, and now we add 2 months of time to just think about what he could have looked like, and now she's just putting what she thought into like actual people, and she just made a guess, and she went with Simmons, so not very accurate. Another problem with the case is the prosecution's defense was faulty. When Simmons was in prison, he hired a private investigator, and he found reports that in the February 7th and 8th lineups, Brown actually identified more than just Simmons and Roberts. So she identified 4 other individuals during the 8 lineup procedures. The police all followed up with them and concluded that they were not involved in the crime at all, and they cleared them. But Brown testified that she only identified Simmons and Roberts, when in reality she identified 4 other people. So this just shows that she didn't really know who she was looking for, and was kind of just blindly finding people that maybe looked a little bit alike. The private investigator also found that Brown identified Delbert Patterson, who was one of the Patterson brothers involved in the robbery and murder prior, back in February. And he was convicted and arrested already, but she identified him, plus 4 other people, plus Robert and Simmons, so she identified a whole pool of people, when in reality, like, a good eyewitness testimony would just find one person and be like, yes, this is them, they were there, I know that for a fact, and she did not know it for a fact. So all of that information that she identified 4 other people, plus Delbert Patterson, was withheld from the defense. It was never shown to them. They didn't know that this existed. And I think that really changes the course of the trial, because if the defense had this information, then it would just further prove that she is an unreliable witness, and that her eyewitness testimony shouldn't have been taken so seriously, and that Simmons and Roberts shouldn't have been convicted just based solely on what she said. And Roberts was released on parole back in, I'm pretty sure, back in either 2007 or 2008, so he didn't spend as much time in prison, but still a significant amount for something that he didn't do. Same things with Simmons. So this just goes to show that eyewitness testimony is important, should be taken with a grain of salt, but it should not be a deciding factor in somebody's case.